Okay, welcome back to another classroom setting with Dr. Carr. We're in class with Carr. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. Thank you. Like, thumbs up, and all of that good stuff. Dr. Carr, thanks for being here today. I know we have a lot on the agenda to talk about. We probably won't get to everything, but there's a lot of things happening with removing statues and monuments all over the country. I have a really particular view on this. I think personally it's a distraction. I think, we do that last. That's window dressing. Those are flowers. The foundation needs to be shored up. We have a crack and a crumbling foundation. Let's shore that up before we start talking about outside paint and put flowers up. But you were talking about off mic, the Lincoln statue. Tell me about what you were talking about. So that, because I don't want to miss
Park. Well,
Lincoln Park.
No. Well, first of all, my dear friend and sister, Professor Hunter, I can't tell you how grateful I am for these conversations. And as you said, off mic, when we were talking, this is something we will be doing anyway. So folks watching thinking, wow, they really playing Know It's Happening in Divine Order. Like I said, this was a Saturday morning and you and I had a little time and space. We'd be sitting around with students, other folks, having these conversations. So like you said, you press record. And so we continue to talk. But this monument thing is very interesting. It all really kind of fits together, our conversations we've been having. And I agree with you in this broad sense that these symbols, while important, symbols are important. I mean, symbols are one of the ways that people create community and pass culture on through time and space. So they are important. However, two things, they're no substitute for structural change, as we know. And the other thing is, I think is very interesting, is they are really an opportunity for us to re-narrate our society, to talk about who we are. That's why they exist. In many ways, they exist almost as a way to try to impose memory of one moment on the future. Let me put this down so that when I'm dead and dust, you will still march to my drum beat. So when you see these statues, you see these symbols, I'm gone, but I'm here. So you keep walking around. In fact, Washington, D.C., which is really, in many ways, Washington, D.C. is a shrine city. I lived in Philadelphia for 17 years. And so when I would tell students all the time, the last 10 years of that, I was working at Howard. I would get up and take the train or drive to D.C. because I just love Philadelphia. I love working with the students there, my students. And, I loved working at Howard too, but I didn't want to leave my people in Philly. Philly kind of got on me. It's like an adopted home in many ways. So I would tell them, exactly, John. I mean, look, if the Africans of Philadelphia did nothing else but to contribute the word John to the lexicon, I mean, this is a word that can be used as a noun, a verb, an adverb, adjective. It's all parts of speech. So I would tell students, I said, every morning I get up in the city where they made up America, and I take the train to the city they made up for America. So, I mean, in other words, Philadelphia is where they basically came together at the old Pennsylvania State House and created what we know now as the United States of America, Declaration of Independence, Constitutional Convention, this kind of thing. But Washington, D.C., they drug it out of a swamp in Northern Virginia and Maryland. And of course, shout out to Eleanor Holmes Norton and all the crew who, if anybody gets a chance to watch that debate they had on Friday about making D.C. the 51st state, and you saw the White Nationalist Party member after member get up and throw these artificial roadblocks. And then, of course, on the Senate side, Tom Cotton, I love the name Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, because he would fit perfectly in Martin Delaney's Blake or Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Even his name, his look, dude, yes. You were born out of time. You should have been an antebellum, Patarola. You know what I'm saying? But when he gets up and says, if you make DC a state, I mean, would you trust a state to marry and bury? Oh man, say it with your chest, as small as it is, bird chest, but say it with your chest, Tom. Say it with your chin if we can find one for you. But I mean, say it, man, say it, get it out. But the point is that Washington, D.C. was a compromise. And one of the ways that D.C. could get elected officials in Congress would be to retrocede into Maryland, because Maryland ceded, the territory, part of the territory. Of course, Maryland would have to agree. Eleanor Holmes Norton brought that up yesterday. But I'm bringing that all up in the context of Lincoln Park and the monument, because we have to think about the fact that when they drew that perfect diamond out of Virginia and Maryland, and then they surveyed it, Pierre L'Enfant, of course, assisted by, among others, Benjamin Banneker. And when L'Enfant goes back to Paris, or when they go back to France, Banneker finishes the job. When they lay it out as a perfect diamond, but then Virginia takes this little corner back. That's why it's a broken diamond now. But it was designed as an idea. This is the district. Even naming it Columbia, again, a gesture toward Christopher Columbus, is making up an artificial memory for the society. They made up the Society for America. And when you look at the statues in Washington, D.C., when you look at the boulevards that were laid out by L'Enfant, laid out by Banneker, laid out by the team, they are very deliberate. The meridian that bisects the city, 16th Street, which leads dead ends into the so-called White House. You see that go all the way out and then up into Maryland. It's really an exercise in geometry. You know, some of my friends.
Well, it's a Masonic.
All of it. That's right.
Degree. Go ahead now.
That's exactly right. Because no, you know it. You know what I'm saying? Because when you see the White House, when you keep going up 16th Street, you pass by the Masonic Lodge. The Shrine Lodge is right there with the steps, all 33. Everything is there. That's exactly right. And so when you go around a circle, DuPont Circle, Lincoln Circle, Seward Square, when you go around these circles and squares in Washington where the statues are, you're literally almost involved in a kind of rite of remembrance. You're making circles around these statues. You're making circles around these figures. So when you put a park or a statue in Washington, D.C., you're saying, in this shrine city, we're going to erect other shrines to cement these figures we pick in memory. So when people start tearing these statues down in a kind of, to the outside looking, indiscriminate manner, they're declaring war on American memory and the idea of some people. I mean, they pull down Albert Pike. You mentioned Mason. So here's a guy, Confederate guy, military guy in the Confederacy, who is also considered one of the architects of American Freemasonry, Scottish Rite Freemasonry, Albert Park. I mean, there's a lot of people probably, you know, I'm sure you heard it many times, certainly growing up in Jersey. I know, you know, I got a copy of Morals and Dogma around here somewhere. I mean, many people watching this got a copy of Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike. They don't know he was a stone cold racist, Confederate racist, but they pulled his statue down. Then they tried to get Andrew Jackson, which is, you can spit from the porch of the White House and hit Andrew Jackson right there in Lafayette Square Park. So it's like, let's get Andrew Jackson. Say, you can't have Andrew Jackson. And then Trump says, well, next thing, what about George Washington? And then he says, statues of Jesus. Yeah, I don't know. I can't get all statues of Jesus because those are everywhere. I mean, in the churches, the stained glass. But what he's talking about is an attack on a version of the past that is used to frame the present and the future. So let's talk about Abraham Lincoln for a minute. Abe Lincoln, there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln, the first public statue actually erected for Abraham Lincoln after he was assassinated, 11 years after he was assassinated. It was erected in a place called Lincoln Park. It's the Emancipation statue. And it, stone's throw from the White House, that park, Lincoln Park, was the first public land named for Abraham Lincoln after he passed away. So what you see then is, by 11 years after Lincoln's assassination, there is a statue erected that is paid for with funds raised substantially by Black people. So Black people raised money for this statue. Now here's a New York connection. A lot of New Yorkers may know this, may not know this. Most people around the country don't. There was a brother who was the dean of Howard Law School for a time, Richard Greener, out of South Carolina. Richard Greener had a daughter named Belle, who changed her name to Belle DaCosta Green because the family split up. Richard Greener moved to New York. Belle moved to New York. Belle, and she's a fascinating figure. And all, we have to talk about her another time. She was J.P. Morgan's librarian. The J.P. Morgan Museum and Library, she built that. She was the chief librarian. Oh, it's a whole story behind it. We had to talk about Belle DaCosta Green. But her daddy, Richard Greener, was on the committee that raised the money, including substantial donations from Black people, small donations from many Black people to fund Grant's tomb. So when people look at Grant's tomb and they say, oh, where'd it come from? Well, it was a brother and a bunch of white dudes and then a lot of money from Black people. And Black people said, look, like Grant, don't like Grant. He was the general on the winning side. We not slaves no more. I got 5 on it. and black people don't build Grant's tomb. You know what I'm saying? So I'm talking about this in the context of Lincoln's tomb, Lincoln's statue, because we don't mistake a statue for liking everything the person the statue represents did. And in the case of Lincoln's statue, in fact, this is the guy, of course, this is Douglas. This is, of course, Fred Douglass. This is volume 4. This is volume 4 of Frederick Douglass's papers. In Frederick Douglass's papers, Frederick Douglass, when the statue is erected, Fred Douglass gives a speech. In fact, he gives the keynote speech. So people now want to pull down Lincoln's statue in the Emancipation statue of Abraham Lincoln in Lincoln Square. Okay, Lincoln Park, rather. The oration in memory of Abraham Lincoln he gives on April 14th, 1876. Now I could read it out of volume 4 of Philip Fauner's Life and Writings of Frederick Douglass, and John Blassingame, good brother, who is an ancestor now. He edited the Frederick Douglass papers out of Yale University, but I prefer this book. This is a book that was actually published locally called Abraham Lincoln and the End of Slavery in the District of Columbia. I'm gonna show you because there's the statue.
And I think the problem with that statue is that I think there's a person in bondage at his knee, at his feet.
That's right.
And it just the image of that, probably disturbs people's souls. I love it.
That is exactly right. And there it is, Karen. There it is, Professor Hunter. You have nailed it right there. This isn't 1874. This is 2020. And so people looking at that statue, the first question they have is, why the black man got to be on his knees? I mean, that's the question, right? And so, in fact, there's a whole book called "The Standing Soldiers, Kneeling Slaves" that talks about the fact that these statues had these Negroes on their knee. And the irony is, it isn't always a white person standing over the top of them. The most famous statue, one of the most famous statues in the South in American history, of course, is the statue of Booker Taliaferro Washington on the campus of Tuskegee University, not 100 yards from where Booker T is buried. I've been there many times. My mom was born right down the street. There's a statue of Booker Washington standing up, and there's a brother crouched, and he's got over him, there's this like blanket. They call it the veil of ignorance. And you see the veil coming up over him, but then you see Washington with the corner of the veil in his hand, lifting it up. And of course, the joke is always, is Booker T lifting this off his brother, or is he putting it on? I mean, that's the black joke. Everybody knows that statue knows that joke. Ralph Ellison, who went to Tuskegee, author of Invisible Man, for example, following Albert Murray followed him down there. They all knew that joke. But here's the thing, the brother's in a crouch, except it's Booker Washington over the top of it. But that kneeling black person represents enslavement. And in the case of this brother on this statue, he is alleged to have been the last black man, the last black person, woman or child, who was captured using the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850.